Good morning. Let's get started. Welcome to the COVID-19 Manufacturing Recovery and Preparedness webinar series. This 45-minute program is being conducted live on Tuesday, May 5th, 2020. I am Maddie Merton, Vice President of Business Retention Expansion of the Economic Development Board for Tacoma Pierce County. I want to thank our manufacturing community who have generously offered to support our frontline workers in producing much-needed PPE and have kept producing essential products. Because of your quick response and contributions, Tacoma Pierce County will emerge out of this crisis stronger. We believe that having a plan to prepare your facilities to restart and developing your capabilities to operate is essential to getting your employees back to work and meeting the needs of your customers. The Economic Development Board and Impact Washington are hosting separate online meetings for manufacturers every Tuesdays and Thursdays until May 7th. Experts from Impact Washington will share guidance on recovery and preparation best practices. These online meetings target the critical needs of our manufacturing community. Each meeting is pre-scheduled with an opportunity for audience members to ask questions at the very end. Also hosting today's call, I am pleased to have online my two partners in this effort, Jeff Lawrence and Joseph Gosar, account executives from Impact Washington. My compliments to Jeff and his team for handling all of the logistics around these meetings. I want to thank the sponsors of these recurring calls, City of Lakewood, City of Puyallup, City of Sumner, City of Tacoma, and Pierce County. Questions can be submitted at any time. For those on the webinar, you can write a question and submit it using the space provided, or for those calling in, you can email jgosar at impactwashington.org, jgosar at impactwashington.org. Once the panelists conclude, we'll get right to the questions and get through as many as possible. Also, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the EDB and Impact Washington website. Now, before I turn over the mic to Jeff Lawrence, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Happy Cinco de Mayo, May 5th, and hope you are all spending time later this evening with family and enjoying the sunshine.
All right, thank you, Maddie. Before I tell you a little bit about Impact Washington and why we're doing this, let me just mention that all webinars have the same content. But please spread the word to partners, suppliers, clients, etc., if you feel it might be useful for them. And if you have to leave midway through the webinar, you can access it afterwards. The webinars are being recorded, and you can access those by clicking on the link that got you here to the webinar. Or if you're on phone and want to watch it later on and see the visuals, you can click on there and you can watch it in its entirety. Impact Washington is a 501c3 nonprofit offering services and support to manufacturers in the state of Washington with the intent of enhancing growth in the manufacturing sector, reducing costs, providing workforce training and empowerment, and generally expanding manufacturer competency and capacity in the state. Impact Washington is the Washington State Center of the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, a nationwide public-private partnership that supports small and medium-sized manufacturers in every state and Puerto Rico. We're well known for the workforce training we do in lean, leadership, and consulting in many manufacturing-related areas. We've been around for over 20 years and have helped the Washington manufacturing community realize increased sales and revenue, help with new investments. We've helped create and retain jobs and have worked with our clients to result in cost savings to their operations. These numbers are based on reporting from third-party surveys that follow the delivery of all of our service engagements. We come from the manufacturing world as owners, executives, operations managers, and engineers, and we've been directly engaged with production operations, so we've dealt with many of the challenges our clients now face and have direct experience with the impact of the services we deliver. We and a large network of resource partners are offering support to manufacturers in this time of uncertainty related to COVID-19, providing a no-cost guidance on recovery preparedness for continuing and returning to operations. The EDB and our other partners in Pierce County are reaching out to the Pierce County manufacturing community to offer assistance to enable you to continue or return to work safely and with confidence. An overview of the presentation is we'll look at high-level steps for site and facility compliance, discuss best practices and housekeeping recommendations not in great detail, because that will take place during assessments that we're offering to our clients. Discuss employer risk assessment to classify worker exposure, implement workplace controls, and to develop an exposure risk decision matrix. So again, spread the word with your colleagues, suppliers, customers, and other manufacturers who you think might benefit. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session so you can ask questions you might have. The NIST MEP centers are receiving some monies from the $2 trillion CARES Act for pandemic response to assist manufacturers in this time of uncertainty to continue or resume operations safely and confidently. A very important element of this is to protect the workforce, of course. Also, we're sensitive to the needs and the challenges of operations managers and owners in this very challenging time. Our clients and the manufacturing community may be manufacturing experts, but we believe we can give some additional support and expertise in these other areas which they're not so versed in. We're able to provide counsel and advice using systematic procedures based upon best available information. So the three high-level steps for site compliance are: step one, review existing procedures and comment on facility best practices and housekeeping recommendations. Step two, conduct an employer risk assessment based upon the position or exposure in the areas that the workers are working. And number three, implement to work with employers to assist in implementation of workplace controls based upon risk of exposure. So diving just a little bit deeper in the review element of the high-level steps, this is where we start the efforts of the Impact Washington support, and we'll focus on assisting in developing a facility-wide communications plan, employee support, and training. Plant leadership should observe and model the measures put in place while reinforcing the importance of observing them to employees entering the plant. Other advice you might give is to add extra capacity to employment assistance programs, helplines, and remind employees about this resource and their services. Another recommendation in communication is to encourage employees to recognize areas or practices that pose a risk for spreading the virus and define a process to quickly review and provide mitigation strategies in these areas. Health screening best practices and recommendations. We will help to establish guidelines and train all employees and visitors on the new COVID-19 related procedures and then help the operations get those into practice. Other health screening recommendations are to limit non-essential visitors from entering the facility. This may include other employees that are usually stationed at a different location. In terms of creating social distancing, this can be done with engineering controls, which we'll discuss later. When possible, minimize in-person meetings. And if you have to have in-person meetings, meet in a large room, be at least 6 feet from one another, and keep the meeting as short as possible. Some examples of good health habits are to record all visitors in a log so they can be contacted in the event that there should be an outbreak. Place posters around the building that support staying at home when sick. Good practices for coughing and sneezing, and keeping hands clean. These can be put in places where they will have the greatest visibility. And probably goes without saying, make sure that there are tissues and trash cans available throughout the building. In terms of specific facilities, measures, and control examples, other best practices tailored to individual sites might be in entrance, hallways, or common spaces, to have or to install or to engage auto opening doors, or encourage bumping doors open with a hip or using foot on a kick plate. Removing a door closure when possible. Keep the doors open to allow employees to move between doorways without touching knobs when it doesn't impact safety. Entrance hallways for the production floor. To maintain uniform cleanliness and healthy employees as best as possible, employees should enter the uniform area with clean hands. In terms of examples for employee clock-in and clock-out practices, consider 6-foot block spacing, as is being done in grocery stores and many other places. If a time clock is in use, many time clocks have web-based features that can be operated through phone apps, or consider some other inexpensive apps employees could use to track time and submit to supervisors. Probably goes without saying, but provide additional sanitizer near the time clock. In terms of additional common tools, human-machine interfaces such as keyboards, buttons, etc., should be sanitized frequently and between users. Standard tools like brooms, rakes, scrapers, or hand tools should be sanitized after each use, especially between 2 separate users. It's a good practice to provide personal pens, Sharpies, or alternatively sanitize them frequently. Risks encountered during shift change, possibly stagger days, shift changes, breaks, and lunches to avoid grouping. Identify individuals that don't need to be in the production restrooms and do not need to be using the same resources as a larger amount of employees. Separate all teams into smaller groups and isolate them to separate bathrooms and break areas when possible. Order Sanitacans with sinks and provide outside tables for additional break areas is another idea, which some of the clients have employed. With some employees working remotely, determine if any office spaces can be repurposed for segregating lunch or changing areas. In terms of meal, lunch break, facilities and activities and interactions, you might want to consider expanding and staggering breaks and meal times for groups of employees to reduce the number of employees in break areas and cafeterias at any one time. Consider using other conference rooms or separation space. There are some clients who have rented tents, for example, to distance employees, and intensify sanitation of refrigerator handles, sinks, microwaves, and faucets or kitchenette areas. In terms of office and clerical work areas, separate and segregate office staff, ideally limiting offices to only 1 person per office space if required on site, and follow a 6-foot distancing practice. And when possible, create walk-up windows or clear plastic barriers for employees looking for human resources or other management or administrative assistance. And just any other additional considerations for visitor training, cybersecurity provisions, or or the signage, limit non-essential visitors from entering the facility, and this may include other employees that are usually stationed at a different location. Very importantly, in this time of remote working, cybersecurity provisions should be considered for each data access point via the web, phone, or other electronic interfaces outside of each facility's firewall protections. This is a very key issue, and I'm sure we've all heard some stories about this. Also consider ordering Santa cans for truck drivers, shipping receiving teams, maintenance teams, etc. To help employees determine appropriate precautions, OSHA has divided tasks into 4 exposure levels: very high, high, medium, and lower. In the high and the very high categories are likely related primarily to healthcare and first responder professions, and most workers in manufacturing will fall in medium or lower exposure risk categories. OSHA looks at basically 3 code requirements for workplace safety. First is the general duty clause, which is that the employer has a duty to create a workplace free from risk and hazards to the degree possible. Bloodborne pathogens, this is written primarily toward healthcare and first responders to prevent the transfer of pathogens via bodily fluids. And PPE, the requirement to provide appropriate PPE for risks in the workplace and to enforce their use. On to the conduct portion of the high-level compliance. A workplace evaluation is done on a basis of exposure risk for specific operations. And this is broken down into 3 categories. Engineering controls, for example, ventilation, barriers, physical layout to minimize contact. And some recommendations here, or some ideas here, are to evaluate your ventilation, possibly employ UV filters with a higher MERV rating, and consider increasing ventilation rates. Evaluate separation surfaces to prevent cross-contamination of breathing air, and consider implementing barriers to ensure 6-foot minimum separation. In terms of administrative controls, these are a lot of the ones that we were talking about previously, with adopting procedures and adopting best practices for the manufacturing environment. And of course, PPE is again providing appropriate PPE for the work environment, and then requiring that PPE is in fact used. So one of the other exercises that we go through with the clients in this assessment process is to lay out a worker risk assessment form. And this is an example that we would work with manufacturing clients to look at all the job positions within the operation to identify what the position is, what the job duties are, to determine the exposure risk level. And in this example, then what workplace controls based on the risk of exposure are warranted for this particular worker's safety. In this example of a shear press operator, there are no engineering requirements needed at this time. Administrative, make sure that the procedures, standard operating procedures, and best practices are implemented in promoting good health habits, social distancing, spacing in lunchroom, hallways, and entryways, etc. And in this particular instance, no additional PPE is required, but employees may choose to wear, for example, masks or other other controls if they feel more comfortable. So we would go through our clients, our manufacturing clients, on a review of all the positions to get a risk assessment form for all the positions and what the appropriate workplace controls are for all the given positions. So the next steps would be implementation, and this is working with the individual operations to work through the process. Each operation requires specific policies tailored to the specific operation in question, risks relevant to their employees or those who they might encounter during work. So we'll talk about that in some examples in the Q&A a little bit more. But before we go on to the Q&A, I'd like to talk a little bit about, at the beginning, Maddie mentioned the tremendous success of and response of Pierce County manufacturers to rising to the occasion to produce much needed PPE. At the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, Impact Washington was involved deeply with the Department of Commerce, with the Governor's Office, and others, serving as a matchmaker to identify critical needs and to mobilize manufacturers to produce goods needed. Now, FEMA has established a PPE exchange, which is in the form of a simple-to-use dashboard to connect private sellers with private sector buyers. Here's a link to it here, and again, for those joining by phone, this link can be accessed by going back to the link that got you here or that the invitation came out on, and this entire webinar will be recorded, and you can go back and get the links there if this is of interest to you. So there's the FEMA PPE exchange, and also there is there's an Amazon business exchange. If your PPE doesn't meet FDA standards, or if you haven't been able to get traction on the FEMA site, you can offer them on Amazon, Amazon Business, and Amazon.com. And again, here's a link to that information, and you can access this by going back again and then clicking on the link that got you here, and you can get the links directly from that. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Joseph Gosar, to explain a little bit more about the assessment and review process, and then take questions that participants in this webinar might have.
Hello. For those of you that don't know me already, my name is Joseph Gosar, and I've recently been brought on to the Impact Washington team to assist Jeff here in the Tacoma South Sound area. And I look forward to meeting many of you and expanding upon the work that Jeff has done, pioneering our influence and ability to help people and companies down in this region of the beautiful Pacific Northwest. I want to define what is considered a manufacturer. Some companies believe that they may not be able to access this free resource, this free grant for consulting. Manufacturers include just anyone that makes a product here in Washington, makes or adds value to. So distilleries, packaging companies, fruit and food producers, assembly operations, would all qualify for this grant that pays for these consulting services and this assessment report. We're also helping companies that are large and small. So if you have a company that only has a few employees, please still reach out. We would love to help you. There are 2 steps that you need to take to get your free assessment and your consulting and report. The first step that you need to do is to contact Impact Washington. If you're in Pierce County, you can email me at jgosar@impactwashington.org. For those on the phone, that's J as in Jack, G as in good, O as in Oscar, S as in Sam, A as in Arnold, R as in Roger, at impactwashington.org. If you're in another part of the state, you can email info@impactwashington.org, or if you're viewing this via the internet, you can email directly your representative as demonstrated here in this map. If you're outside of Washington, please email the info@impactwashington email address and put in the title of the email what state you're in, and we will forward that to your local MEP center so that they can assist you in a similar fashion. The second step after you have contacted Impact Washington is Impact Washington will reach out to you to set up a time to do a preliminary conversation. This is typically 10, maybe 20 minutes for a larger facility, a larger company. The purpose of this first initial discussion is to go over some intake questions and identify your specific needs so that we can tailor and tailor and match the consulting and the consultant to your specific process, product, and challenges. These assessments can typically be done in one day. So to put that in terms of a time frame it takes the consultant about a day to do this worth of work. But from your side, what we would set up is about a 2-hour meeting in the morning and about an 1.5 hour meeting in the late afternoon. The morning portion is to gather the information so that he can create a report for you and the third-party assessment. And the 1.5 hour meeting in the afternoon would be to go over the report as well as some other documentation that you would be going through along with us. Your takeaways from the consultant will be a report documenting your risk levels, the current efforts that you're taking to mitigate your risks, and planned or proposed improvements based on your discussions with the consultant. I encourage you to leverage this resource. It's free. The government has set it up so that you can get a grant. It's extremely valuable. And those that have gone through this process have been highly impressed with the ability that our consultants have had to help them identify areas that, frankly, me and most other people would miss. And I think more importantly, when you can get a production manager and a safety manager in the same room with a consultant, the conversations and the additional ideas that come out of that are better than us doing it alone and trying to figure it out maybe on your own. So before we open it up for questions, I'd like to remind you that there will be another call on Thursday. Please invite those in your supply chain, your industry friends, because I'd love to have them take advantage of this resource as well. And ultimately, we all want to keep our colleagues and the people that we rely on safe. We'd like to thank you all for joining us. Before we open it up for questions, we'd like to, sorry, missed my spot here. All right, I believe we're ready for questions. Maddie is going to be helping us with this portion.
Great, thanks so much, Joseph. Great content and information. So I'll go ahead and look through some of the questions. Let's see. Okay. Have you implemented this process with local manufacturers? Joseph or Jeff, did you want to take this?
Yes, yeah, we have about 25 or 20 assessments that we're working on right now, currently with different manufacturers this week and the beginning of next week. We've been all the way through this process with several so far since we rolled out the initiative starting last Friday. And those that have taken advantage of this have received a lot of reassurance. I just got off the phone with Cascade Design, and that was one of the things that he mentioned when we were kind of doing our follow-up questions with him and on how we did, was that this whole process really reassured him that they're doing what they can and that it's documented, which is very important.
Could you share an example of the changes that have been implemented as a result of speaking with your consultants?
Yeah, at one manufacturer, we found that by going through the different types of positions, that they really had several different groups of people and risk levels. You had your office workers, which were the lowest risk. You had your production floor individuals that had a little bit higher risk just because of the number of people and having to pass each other in the halls and stuff like that. And then you had your shipping and delivering, or your group that set things out for the delivery staff, because they were getting in contact with the delivery staff. And then the delivery staff was the highest risk because they were actually going to install their products in facilities, and so they were exposed to a lot more people. And because of these different risk levels, they decided to actually separate the groups. And one way that they did that was by separating the bathrooms. So one bathroom would be used by the office staff, another bathroom would be used by the production floor, and then their delivery people and the individuals that would put the products and help load the trucks, those people would use a porta potty. And if they had any truckers that needed to come to the facility and use the restroom, they had even a separate porta potty from that. And again, that's an example that I wouldn't have necessarily thought of myself, and a solution that the client was really excited about, because it was something they were worried about, bringing, exposing their people to, especially the delivery staff, because they have to ride together, they have to interact with people, and mitigating that risk of the entire factory or facility getting sick.
If we require, next question, if we require all visitors, vendors, suppliers who enter the facility to wear a mask, should we expect them to provide their own mask?
This is a great example of the administration's ability to impact something like this. And so what we've encouraged before is for the staff to reach out to the third party groups and to give them a heads up first, and to have a couple masks on hand for the first week or so, that people are getting used to needing to bring their own masks, so that there's something for them to mitigate that risk. But we believe going forward that requiring people to bring their own will only be able to be enforced if we help train our staff and those that we interact with to proactively take the initiative to have them on hand and to know that it is a requirement.
Is there a certification available that your facility meets these standards?
As of yet, there's no certification set out by the state or the federal government. However, we believe in that the process that we're going through and the questions and areas that we're looking into would prepare someone, if not all the way, very much along the path of getting any kind of certification that would be needed.
A two-part question. Hold on. Our janitor uses the disinfectant supplies and understands SDS. Now we want others to clean high-touch surface areas. They normally don't use these janitorial supplies. I cautionarily read all directions on containers and SDS first. Employees are well-meaning, but where do we draw that line on what chemicals they can use?
If this was a concern, it's something that we definitely want to talk about during our initial conversation so that we can pull in a consultant that has a deep background in chemicals and their use within facilities. I would probably bring in someone that has a background in food and or nutraceutical, in particular IP69 wash down rooms, because they would know a lot about chemicals and a lot about what would be the best chemicals to allow the staff, the general staff, to use in terms of safety and without sacrificing effectiveness.
And are you able to conduct an assessment on a high clearance facility?
Yeah, we're able to do that. All of our assessments right now are actually done virtually. So what that looks like is during the morning meeting, typically at the beginning, or if it's not possible to do it during the morning meeting for scheduling, we schedule a pre-morning tour, a virtual tour where someone takes us around with a cell phone and walks through the facility, shows us the lunch rooms, the break rooms, entries, halls, the different production flows, so that we can help assess them. However, we understand that virtual meeting and virtual tour of a facility may not be possible for certain locations. In that case, a couple options that we have are to have you send us some pictures ahead of time, as well as possibly a floor layout or a diagram of the facility. If those aren't possible because it's even higher security, we can just go through the discussions with you. I would say that it's definitely more effective if we have a better idea of what things look like in the space that you have. For example, a lunchroom, we can be talking about it, but knowing what that looks like and where the microwave's at and where the fridge is at and where the door's at helps our consultants ask better questions. But if we don't have that, we can still go pretty deep and help you in a lot of areas.
And then next question, what should we do to prepare for the assessment?
So in preparation for the assessment, you would speak with one of the account executives to figure out which consultant you're going to use and when that's going to be. And we will also send you an example report so you can see kind of what you're going to be getting out of this. We can send you we're also going to send you a PDF form that has a lot of really good and useful information, as well as the checklist and topics that we'll be going through with you during our morning meeting. And we'll also send you an Excel that Jeff showed earlier that allows you to start going through the different positions and so you can fill those in, and we can review those with you during the afternoon session.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. So, let's see. What is the cost of the assessment, and is it truly free?
Yeah, the assessment is completely free. It's been paid for by a grant. The consultant's time is paid for. The only strings attached to this, the usage of this grant and the consultant, is that in 3 to 6 months, you will receive an invite to do a third-party questionnaire in about 15 minutes. And the purpose of that questionnaire is so that the government and so that our bosses know that Impact Washington used those funds effectively and that they were well spent. So, 15-minute survey for an entire day of a very specialized consultant's assistance in you getting back to work safely is a pretty good deal.
And last question, where can we find clear guidance on temperature taking, employee screening, specifically training, and how or who should handle confidential information? How long does the employer need to maintain temperature information?
So that's a really good question. A lot of the discussions that we've had with our clients is around temperature taking and how to do that in their facility. It can get a little tricky because you don't want, for example, the temperature gun to be a source of contact between people and to be a vector of contamination and illness. So and then you also have an issue where you have to protect the person that's taking those, and then like you mentioned, the HR side of things in terms of how to document that, how long to keep it, how to make sure that you are not infringing on any laws or privacy issues. Those questions would be best answered by one of our consultants that has extensive HR background, and by extensive I mean very extensive, and he would be able to actually go through that question with you and give you very, very clear details, not only on how to do it, but the HR side of things and privacy side of things. He does a lot of things a lot of consulting with hospitals and other facilities. So.
Great, thanks, Joseph, for the responses. And I think we are going to go ahead and wrap up our webinar. And again, wanted to thank the folks that have joined us today. If you didn't get your questions answered from today's webinar, please reach out to the folks here that are on the call, Jeff Lawrence, myself, or Joseph. Also visit the Impact Washington site, which will have, and also our site, which will have recordings to today's webinar. And again, want to thank you again for joining us today, and want to thank our sponsors again for hosting this call. Wanted to remind everyone that we do have a final call on Thursday, this Thursday, May 7th at 11 o'clock, and would encourage you to encourage your folks and people friends within the manufacturing community to attend the webinar. Preparation is key in ensuring that our community and our manufacturing community gets back up and running, and doing it well and effectively and safely is critical for us to move forward from this. So thanks again, and this concludes our call for today. Thank you.